Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we discussed about the nested classes as well as the inner classes section here. So today we are going to discuss about the another important concept called Vararg here. So basically, the Vararg is introduced on the 1.5 onwards here. So what exactly the Vararg is going to do? So before going to discuss about the this particular Vararg here, so now we want to understand the array related example here. So how this particular array related example is working and how we can convert into the array information into the vararg here. Okay. So basically it is the parameters of the method. So based on our requirement, we are going to pass the parameters. Like once we define the parameter, we are not going to modify the parameter. But here using this var concept here, so how many number of parameter you want to pass, you can pass. So there is no conditions like only the certain parameters we want to pass. Okay. First we'll see without the vararg concept and later we'll come up with the vararg how it is going to work. Okay. The simple understanding here, if you are, if you define the method that is going to take the parameter for the internet connection. So what are the parameter we can pass for the internet connection? So basically we are going to pass the username, password, and the name of the protocol, something like file name. Okay. ఏదో వచ్చినట్టు అనిపించా. So file name and protocol, we are going to pass multiple parameters here. Okay, sometimes what happen here, if I want to add one more parameter, that we are not going to add here. Because once we define the parameters, we cannot modify the parameters here. But using the vararg concept here, we can add how many parameters we are interested. Okay, so first we'll see pass array. How this particular array related example is going to work, and the same example, how we can convert into a vararg here. So this is the pass array I'm trying to define. And so this particular pass array, if you observe carefully, I am using one static method and static void VA test method I'm implementing. And this VA test method is expecting the parameter. If you observe carefully, so what is the type it is? This is important here. Okay, so as of now, we did not discuss about the this kind of type here. So here, this is an int type, and here we are providing the brackets. Brackets basically what it will do, it will try to store the multiple values. So instead of storing the one value, it will try to come up with the multiple values. Okay. So here the type we made as a array type here. Now how many values we can provide? So once we define the size, we can provide the values. Okay. Based on the size, the values are going to work here. Now observe. So after this, now I'm going to print this out here. And first, what I will do, number of args here. Okay, so this number of args, how I'm going to print here, v dot length here. So length is a variable here. And after this, so what I will do, I'm going to write a content here. I'm going to write the content here. So this is the particular information about the parameter what we are passing, something like VA test is a method, and into array type we come up with the parameter. Now what we will do, so once we define this particular print here, now I'm going to use the for loop because I want to iterate the values because we are going to get multiple values because what is the type we made here, we come up with the array type here, int x colon v. Okay, so int x colon v. So it is a for each style. This is example we already discussed in the previous example. So it is a for each style. Now what I will do, here I'm going to print this x value Okay, so once we define this X value, now what I'm doing here, so I'm going to print a empty line here. Once the loop is completed, I'm going to print empty line. So carefully observe, this is important because if it is an array type here, we can pass multiple values. Whenever we are calling this particular VA test method, we can pass multiple parameters. So now, based on this particular array type, we are repeating the loop here and we are printing the value. Okay, so this is we already identified in the previous example. And now what I'm doing here, I'm going to write with the main method, and inside the main method, I will call the VA test method. So how many parameters we can pass? Based on our requirement, we can pass the parameter. Now observe carefully. Int n1 is equals to, this is the array initialization I'm trying to initialize here. So only one value. And again, I'm trying to come up with n2, something like 10 comma 20 comma 30 comma. Okay, so there are the sum one more array. So first array we created with n1 value is only one value, and we come up with another array something like n2, so which is expecting multiple values, and third one I'm not providing anything. So this is the VA test method I'm calling, and I will pass n1. Okay, in the bed I'm passing n1 and n2 and n3. So if you observe carefully, the method I'm calling multiple times and with the different parameters. So first time I'm passing only one value, second time passing multiple values, and third time nothing. So empty array I'm passing. Getting the pen? Empty array I'm passing. So if I'm going to run this example, observe carefully how it is working. So number of arguments we are having only one, and I'm trying to print this particular content 0. And same way, the number of arguments I'm passing as a 6 here, the content, these are all the particular values. Okay. And now you can see the number of arguments we are having 0 and no content here. Getting the point. So this is we need to understand here. But how this particular the parameter, how it is working here based on this array type, because we come up with the array type we are providing, and this the VA test is also expecting array type here. Okay, so this is the simple example whenever we are trying to work on the array related example. Okay, if I'm going to convert the same example into Vararg here, getting the point. If I'm going to convert the same example into Vararg, now observe how it is going to work. So here I'm trying to remove this array type here, but now how I'm going to use, here I'm going to use the three dots. Getting the point. So this is, we will call it as a Vararg concept here. So if you observe carefully, I'm removing the particular three array type, whatever the particular brackets we used it. So I remove the brackets. Now it is the type of Vararg. Now again I'm checking the length here, and I'm trying to check with the content here. Okay. So once we define this, now what I will do, if you observe carefully, I'm not going to use this particular array types here. I'm not going to use this particular array types. How I'm going to use this particular values here? So directly I'm able to pass the values. So first one is 10, and the second one. So observe carefully how I'm passing here. Getting the button. So carefully observe. Earlier we come up with a arrays related example that we already identified. We can pass how many values we want, because here whenever we are trying to come up with the array initializer concept, so it will try to look up the values. Based on the values, it's going to create the size and it will initialize the values. So that we already identified here. But here if you see, so we don't have any array concept yet. But even though The method is expecting one parameter, the method is expecting around 6 or 7 parameter, and the same method is expecting nothing. The same method is expecting 0. But so now if I'm trying to go for the box class, if you see, we define the set values method. How many parameter we are passing here? 3 parameters. So first one is width, height, and depth here. So we have a 3 parameters, right? Now what we need to understand here, if I'm not adding this, the last value, if I'm not adding this particular last value, what happens here? So we will get a compilation error. We will get a compilation. Why we will get a compilation error? Because we define the 3 parameter, but if you pass 1 parameter or 2 parameter, or if you are not passing any parameter, so you are going to get a compilation. So observe carefully. So where we define the set box here. Now observe, I am enabling this and I am removing this particular value. So now you can see the set values method is giving me an error. Is giving me an error. Getting the point? But how we can resolve this issue? So we can resolve the issue either whatever the parameter we are providing, so we should match the all the values, or what we can do, we can come up with this particular Vararg concept. If you see, whenever we are defining the Vararg concept, so there is no restrictions here. You can pass one value, you can pass without the parameter, or you can pass multiple values. But all are applicable into this particular Vararg here. But if it is a normal method, if I'm trying to remove this, if I'm trying to remove this as a normal method, you can see this below 2 we are getting an error here. Getting the point? The below 2 we are getting an error here. So why we are getting an error basically? So this method is expecting only one parameter. This method is expecting only one parameter. But here how many parameter we are passing here? So around 7. How it is going to differentiate the parameters? So with the help of the comma. So this particular comma is differentiating this is the first parameter and second parameter, third parameter, like this. Getting the point? So any questions regarding this particular Vararg concept here?
Sir, is it related to like a method overloading kind of concept, sir? Like we can create any number of parameters with the same method name.
See, here I'm not creating any number of. See, method overloading basically will define the multiple methods with the same name. But here I'm not defining any multiple method. I'm trying to define only one method. The method will take multiple values.
Yeah, correct. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So this is our requirement. We can pass one parameter, we can pass empty, and we can pass multiple values. So this kind of concept is not applicable whenever we are defining normal method. So the normal method example, this I explained here. So this method only applicable 3 parameter. If you miss any parameter here, so we get an error. Getting the point? So see the differences between set values method as well as this particular VA test method. Getting the point? This is one of the important example. Now if I'm going to run this, observe carefully. Number of argument will pass as a 1 and the content value is a 10. So the number of arguments we pass as a 7. So these are all the 7 elements here. And the last one, we did not pass anything. So it's returning nothing. Getting the point? So this is important here. Okay, so this is the way we can define the Vararg concept method. And basically, if you are not aware of how many methods, like how many parameter we want to pass, so then we can go for this particular Vararg. But once you identified, we can pass only 1 or 2 parameters. No need to define this Vararg concept. Just come up with a normal method and define the 2 parameters itself. Getting the point? So why we want to repeat multiple times this particular loop here whenever we are trying to work on this Vararg concept. Okay, so let's have one more example on the same Vararg here.
sir, how the memory allocation will be when we call the method with some that argument only it will create, or how the memory allocation process will happen?
See, basically, this is the stack memory allocation is going to create first. And here, whenever the stack memory allocation, basically, it is a one thread of operation. So once the current thread is completed this execution, the memory will not available. So it will remove from this particular main method. And you can see here, so these are all the three times we are calling. The memory allocation is going to created for the three times, and the three times is already destroyed by this particular once the line number 16 is completed.
It will overwrite. Am I right, sir?
No, this is basically different. If you observe carefully, if the current example is executing only one thread, so basically, the line number, the current thread is executing. So it what happens here? So these two methods are not executed because we are working on under the one thread of operation. So once the one thread of completed, now it will back to the line number 15. So once the 15 is completed, now it will come back to the 16. So while executing this VA test line number 14, so we are going to create a one stack memory. So this stack memory, it will try to initialize this particular into the Vararg values here inside the stack memory. Okay, so once it is initialized, after performing the line number 8, now what happens here? The stack memory, the variable creations, all those things, it will destroy. Okay, in the same stack memory, so it will initialize here. One more VA test with help of this multiple values. For this particular, again, multiple values, it's going to initialize all the values here, and it will try to perform the operation. So once it is completed, it will destroy.
If we
Okay,
define that method as non-static, then how it will be, sir?
so the non-static basically will come up with object creation. So
Okay.
whenever the object is going to destroy, the object along with the variables and methods will destroy. Otherwise, the object will still available in the heap memory.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So let's have a simple example on this. So basically, along with the normal method, we can define the Vararg concept. So for example, so here I'm trying to define the normal method, something like int a. Getting the point? So something like int a I'm passing here, and this is nothing but the second parameter we are passing as a var. But why we are getting the line number 16 as error? Any idea? So why I'm
Sir,
getting the
it
line number?
needs at least one parameter as a mandatory. The next one can be 0.
Okay, getting the point. So this 25 is going to store in the which parameter? Is the first
A.
parameter or the var? Okay, it's good.
Yes.
So it's going to store in the a value. Now what I will do along with this, so here I'm going to print after this loop is repeated. Here I will print. Okay, so just I'm printing the a value at last. Along with a value, I'm trying to print this particular vararg values. So if you observe carefully, now, so the number of arguments 0. Why we are getting number of arguments 0? So if you see, here I'm passing 10. Here I'm passing this particular 10 value, but still I'm getting the number of arguments 0. Because whatever the 10 we are providing, the 10 value is storing into the first parameter that is called a. Getting the point? So if you pass this, so from the second values, now if you run the same example, now you can see number of arguments we are having 4, and it start with the 20. It is not starting with the 10 here because whatever the 10 we are providing here, the 10 value now it is trying to store into the first parameter that we define as a. Okay, from the second onwards here, it is trying to look for the vararg concept here. Okay, same way here also it will try to see from the 20 to 70, it's moving into the Vararg, and whatever the 10 we define, it is now initialized into the first parameter. And the last one, we don't have a number of arguments here because we come with only one value that is trying to store into the A value. Right? So this is important here. Along with the Vararg here, we can come up with a normal method here. But whenever we are defining like this, we should come up with the normal method. It's a mandatory. So we need to define the normal method properties first. Later, we can come up with a Vararg here. Okay. So along with this, now what we can do, we can define the any data type here. Not only this particular int, we can come up with any data type here.
Sir, one doubt.
Okay.
If we define the first argument as Vararg and if we define the second argument as a normal argument, so how the system knows that so if we give one value, then that will consider as Vararg or A?
See here. First, see the error here. What happening here, basically.
Okay, good. Yeah, otherwise it will be tough to understand, correct? Yeah.
Okay. So basically, whatever the Vararg we are providing, it is the last parameter of the method. It is not the first parameter. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now observe, along with this particular int, so we can come up with a string message here. So this is the different data type I'm using here. Now what I will do, I'm going to provide the message here. Along with the message, I'm trying to check with the length here and some content I'm trying to provide. Okay, now what I will do, so this all the three methods we are getting an error because the first parameter we are passing as a message, like it's a string data type. But here we did not define the first parameter here. So what we can do, here we can define the first parameter, something like, so 5 Vararg concept I'm trying to write here. Okay, so this is the first method we come up with the 5, and the second method, I think around it's a 7, and so third one I'm going to post as a 1 Vararg. So this is a message I'm trying to provide. So now observe, the first parameter we are providing as a string, and from the second parameter we come with the Vararg here. So this is the 5 arguments we are having, and 7 Varargs here, and 1 Vararg here. So this is the way also we can define the Vararg here. Not only this particular int, we can come up with any number of data type. But here, so all the mandatory parameters we should define first. Later, the Vararg concept here. Okay. So basically, the Vararg parameter we should define as a last parameter here. Okay, this is another important example. And now we are going to discuss about the overloading Vararg concept here. How we can overload the particular Vararg concept here. So if you observe carefully, I am defining the VA test here, getting the point. So which is expecting only this particular message. The VA test method I'm defining and is expecting only Vararg parameter. Now internally what I will do, so here I'm going to write the same message what we defined earlier. Okay, so number of arguments here, and now this method, okay, so we can pause the same as it is here. But if you observe carefully, what I will do, I'm going to define the one more method. The name of the method is same, but what I'm doing here, I'm going to change here. So this is basically it is the overloaded Vararg concept here. If you observe, the name of the method is same, and here we are passing as a interrelated Vararg parameters, and here we are passing Boolean related Vararg parameters. Now we can modify to so Boolean here. And now what we can provide here, something like,
Sir, does it not require any number of arguments, difference in the number of arguments between the two methods, or does
no,
it have?
basically the Vararg basically how many parameters you are going to write you can take. So there is no restrictions
Yeah,
here.
yeah, that as it is a variable, like varied in the number of parameters, it is allowed. Otherwise, for normal methods, it's not allowed, right, sir?
Say normal method if you define the one parameter, but if the type is different. Here we are defining the Boolean, and here we are defining the int. So the type is different, so we can come up with the same.
So even though its number of arguments is only one, and if the difference is only with the data type, it is allowed in the method overloading, is it?
Yes. So here I'm defining the name of the method, something like this is the VA test Boolean method we are calling here, and here we are going to pass int. Now what we need to understand here, how we can pass these messages. Now what I'm doing is I'm trying to come up with one more here. So one more Vararg concept method, and this is basically is expecting two parameters. Okay, so this is expecting two parameters, and here I will remove this, and I can come up with a message here. Okay, if we observe carefully how many methods we define here, so three methods. So first one is expecting integer, second one is expecting boolean, and third one is expecting string with the integer. Heading the point. So you can come up with a one more parameter if you want. You can define the double something character related, and you can define one more method like this. Okay, so here the name of the method is same, only here the type of the parameter is different for these two, and here the one more, the whatever the parameter we are defining, this is the order here, because this particular vararg is coming as a second parameter. So initially we define as a first parameter. Because of here we come up with the one more data type here, that is we made as a first parameter. The vararg concept we define as a second parameter here. Okay, now so which method is going to call for this particular VA test? The last method, whatever we define here. Okay, what about this particular above one? How we can define the above ones basically? Let me write the first one. Okay, so this is method is going to call for the first the overloaded method what we define here. So this method is going to execute whatever we define just now here, this section of code. Okay, and now the another one VA test method I'm defining, and this particular VA test method will look up the true comma false comma something like true false here. So this is the boolean related vararg concept method we define. Okay, so whenever I'm trying to run here, so observe carefully how this particular example will work. So this is the five arguments we are passing, seven arguments we are passing, and one argument. So this is the method is executed here. So just now we discussed about this particular example. I think it's clear. Now the one more here, this is the int related method is calling, and the number of arguments we are having five, and these are all the 5 elements. And later we are calling the boolean related one, the number of argument we are passing as a 4. So this is the content here. Okay, so this is important here, how we are defining the Vararg overloaded method here. So anyone having any questions?
Sir, can it have more than one Vararg variable parameter?
Okay, so what is the another type you want to write?
Uh, Boolean dot v.
So this 3 dots is mandatory. We need to come up with the 3 dots only. You cannot write 2 or 1.
Okay.
Okay, but what we discussed just now, basically Vararg is the last parameter. Okay,
Okay.
if I'm trying
That
to
means,
define this,
yeah, it should have only one parameter.
so now
Okay.
see. Okay, in a method we can define only one Vararg parameter.
Okay. Sir, one question. How is it printing the contents, the values, sir? I know it's printing with from the for loop, but I just want to know.
See, basically the printing message here, if you see, I come up with the print method for 2 times. And here what I'm doing here, so this particular line is going to print in the same line, and along with this particular values, whatever the values we are providing, these values are going to print in this particular line number 5, because I'm using the 2 methods as a print, and finally I'm trying to use the println. So why I'm using this println? If this method is going to call multiple times, for each time I'm going to give some space, like it is the next line. How many times we are calling this particular method? For each time, the method is going to call next time here. The next line is going to print. For example, this method is called the 3 times. Okay, so first time it is printing the value. Okay, whenever I'm calling the second time, now what I'm doing here, I'm calling this particular println. Now it will move on to the second line. Otherwise, it will keep on continuing on the same line. So otherwise, now what happens is, from the same location only, the second the method also it's going to print. So instead of printing this in the same line, now I'm calling the println. So whenever I'm calling this particular println, the cursor will move on to the next line. Okay, so this is the purpose of this particular the print statements of what I used here.
Sir, as
Okay, sir.
we have,
Thank you.
Mhm, sorry. Sir, as we have not defined x value, by default it will take from 0.
X value. So what, where you are talking about the which X value?
In the for loop, sir. In the for loop.
So basically, see, this is not a for loop. This we'll call it as a for each year. Based on this particular values, whatever the values we are going to get, it will
Mhm.
try to take the current value. Whenever this loop is repeating multiple times, it will try to look up the current value and it will store into this particular X. So we don't want to initialize the X value.
So that array list of values, it will go and keep it in the x variable, right?
Yes, every time the current value will store.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, so now what I will do, we can come up with the ambiguity here. So whenever I'm trying to define this particular varchar, how it is going to work, so that we need to understand. Okay, let's have a one more example. Sorry, we define and so varchar I'm trying to define here, and I'm trying to come up with a main method. And now what I will do, I will copy these 2 methods, and I will paste it here. Along with this, now what I'm doing here, I'm going to copy these 2. So here, so question here, I'm trying to write in the comment section. If I'm trying to enable this, the last one, the line number 24. The line number 24, what I write as a comment here, if I'm trying to enable this comment, if I'm trying to remove this comment, this whatever the the lines of code we implemented is going to successfully it is going to run, or it is going to give any compilation error. So I come up with a two overloaded method. First one is expecting into Vararg concept, and the second one is it's expecting boolean. But now what I'm doing is, so I'm trying to pass the integer related, and the same way I'm trying to pass the boolean related. But the line number 24, I'm not going to pass anything. Just I'm going to call the VA test method. So this VA test method, will it execute or it is going to give any error?
I think it will give an error, sir. It will not be sure of which method it should go into.
Okay, now if I'm going to comment out this, now what happens here?
It will print as 0 parameters for the int varargs method.
Yes. So this is important here basically. So whenever we are trying to come up with the only var concept here, so you can see we are getting an error here. Getting the point. So this is important basically. So because the compiler cannot understand, so either should I call this boolean related one, or should I call this particular int related one? Compiler will get an ambiguity. So which method I want to call? If only one method is available, so it will execute here. So this is I want to provide the information. Okay. So when we are trying to define the same one parameter as a varchar with a different data type, so we cannot call the empty method. We should pass the value something. If I'm going to pass here 10, getting the point. Now compiler understand, it will call to the integer. Otherwise, if I'm trying to pass as a true values, so it will look up the boolean related one. Okay. So now if I'm going to pass something like a 10.45, so right now we don't have any the double related one. Getting the point. So this is the way we need to define the parameters. So any questions on this? The ambiguity example?
Sir, if you have a VA test with no parameters and you have a boolean method, so
It will execute. Okay. So if I'm going to run, we'll get an 0 parameters.
okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now we'll move on to the one of the important concept to call inheritance here. So right now we discussed the one of the OOPS principle called encapsulation in the last session. So it's basically how we are trying to making our class as a encapsulation principle. We are making the variables as a private, and we are accessing only through the help of this particular set assign getters. Now another important information we are discussing, that is called inheritance here. So basically inheritance is this is also one of the objective the principles here. But now what we need to understand here, we are going to create one general class, and it's going to define the some set of common informations like common methods or common variable related information. So the particular class is going to inherit it into the other classes, or we cannot identify how many classes this particular the common class is going to inherit here. So this particular concept we are going to call it as a inheritance here. Okay, and whatever the class is trying to inheriting it, that we'll call it as a super class, and whatever the the subclass we are trying to achieve the common functionality which is we define in the super class, the particular class we are going to call it as a subclass here. So whenever we are trying to discuss about the inheritance concept here, we'll make a relationship between super class with the subclass here, and here the super class is a the common class here, subclass is a specific class. So this is important, we need to understand here. But how we are going to make the relation between these two, so that we are going to understand in a current example here, getting the point. So basically, so we are going to use the extends keyword and implements keyword, making the relation between the superclass and subclass here. Okay, so let's have a simple example on this particular inheritance here. So here INH I'm making and INH A I'm trying to define inheritance A class. So this is the common class I'm trying to define. And this particular common class, what happens internally? Into I comma j, getting the point. Into I comma j, the two variables I'm declaring here, and one method I'm trying to declare. Show ij method I'm trying to declare here. So once I declare this particular show ij, now what I will do, I'm going to print this particular values here, I and j. And here I'm making I and j here. Okay, so these are all the I and j values I'm trying to print. So this is the common class I'm creating. This is, we can call it as a super class. Now what I will do, I'm going to create a one more class. So let me create a one more class, something like INHB. And here we can make the relation here. So the relation, if you see, this is the keyword we are going to use. So what is the keyword we are using? Extends keyword. So whenever we are making this particular extends keyword, here we need to write the class name here. So what is the class name we can write here? Something like INHA. This particular class, now what happens internally? This particular class, what happens internally? So whatever the common features we are having, the common features are going to store into this particular INHB. Okay, so this is important here. So basically, it will try to copy the common functionality into this particular subclass here. Okay, here, what are all the common functionality we are having? Something like I and j. This I and j logically existed into this particular subclass here, not physically. Okay, along with I and j, we have one more method. We have one more method called something like show ij method. The show ij method also will available into this particular subclass here. So this is the hierarchy we need to understand here. Superclass and subclass relation. How we are making the relation? This is the keyword we are going to use, something like extends here. And once we define this, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to come up with one variable, something like int k. So after defining this int k, so I'm coming with a show k method, and here I'm trying to print this particular k value. Okay, so this is the way the show value I'm trying to print. After printing this particular show value, finally, so one more method I'm trying to define. This is the specific method. It is not a common method. The sum method I'm defining, and it is a specific method to this particular class called inheritance B. Okay, and observe how we can make the sum of this particular three values. Here I place j plus k, and here I place j plus k. So if you observe carefully, even I did not define this I and j. I did not define the I and j in the class called inheritance B. Only we define the variable called k. Now, even though we are happily, we are able to get this particular I and j. We are able to get this particular I and j here. Okay, so that we need to understand. Okay, so here along with this particular I and j, now what we can do, we can come up with a method calling also. So we'll see the method calling how we can call from this particular subclass. Okay, so here only I'm defining the main method, or basically we can go for the one more class here. The main class purpose I'm trying to define one more. It is a simple inheritance. We are going to call whatever the classes we created super class with the subclass here. That is the relation we are going to call it as a simple inheritance here. And inside this simple inheritance, I'm making the main method here. And now what I will do, I'm going to create a main class object inheritance here, INA. Okay, so this is the inheritance B. So two objects we created. We created the superclass and we created subclass object. Now what we will do, whenever we are creating these two classes here, we are going to initialize the values. So right now, the values, right now, we are not working with the encapsulation principle here. So because we did not provide the variable as a private here. Okay, it's a normal example we implemented here. Now how we can access this particular values directly. So here with help of INA dot I, I'm initializing value something like 10 and INA dot j is equals to something like 20 I'm initializing. And after this, so INB dot, basically we can initialize only one value that we define as a k. But if you see carefully, whatever we are defining here, whatever we are defining INA, so INB, sorry, it is a subclass of this particular example. We can access here IJK. We can access IJK. If you observe carefully, INB dot I am providing. Basically, the I is not available in the subclass. So even though it is not available, but still we can access the I value. Now observe carefully, INB dot J. Okay, INB dot K. Something like 35. So see the values here. I and j, basically these two are the original values. These two are the original values existed in the inheritance A class, but these two values are logically existed, not the physically. This is important here. These two values are logically existed into the subclass here, and this particular value, sorry, this particular variable physically existed into this particular inheritance B class. Okay, so this is we need to understand carefully. Okay, so this is we need to understand very carefully here. Okay, now observe carefully how we can so call the methods. How we can call the particular method. So INA dot, what is the method we can call? Show IJ method. Okay, if I'm going to call INA dot show K method, sorry. If I'm trying to call the show K method, what happened here? It is getting an error here because the show K method, it is not defined under this particular superclass. Where we define this particular show K method, that we define under this particular subclass here. Getting the point? So this is we need to understand very carefully here. Okay. So basically now if I'm going to modify the references here, now you can see whatever the error we got earlier, the error is resolved. Along with this, again I'm going to call INB dot show IJ method. So now observe carefully. So whatever the method we define, show IJ and IJ properties in the superclass with the help of this particular subclass. So if you observe INB is our subclass reference. With the help of this particular subclass reference, you are able to call the superclass functionality. So this is important here. So this is the main advantage we are going to get from the inheritances. Now you can see INJ This is called from the superclass reference, and the same ij we are calling from the subclass reference. So here only the values is providing. I value 15, 25 I given, and here I value 10 and 20 we given. So because it is a superclass reference and this is the subclass reference here. And finally, the k value we are having 35, the 35 I'm trying to print here. Okay. So any questions here?
Sir, if we comment like inb dot ij values, even though it will work, right? It will take the parent class values and it will sum and it will give the function, right?
Okay, see, observe here. For your question, I commented. Now observe. So why I'm getting this 0, 0? So you need to answer the question.
Means it is not defined in the subclass, right?
Yes. So basically, this object location is different. This object location is different. Okay, just think here. Inside this inheritance B, along with the K, so it's going to initialize the I and J also. If we observe, this is an a heap object I created, and this is the one more heap we are going to create for the inheritance here. So here we already identified I value and J value. So this is we are going to get as a 20, and I value we are going to get as a 10. That is we know, because whenever we are creating the in subclass here, so the subclass will available J. So this is the I value, and this is a j value, and this is a k value. But now the I value and j value we did not initialize here. Okay, only we are initializing this particular k value as a 35. Now what about this I and j? Because this object location is different, this object location is different. This object is having the relation. This object cannot have a relation. Even though whenever we are having the relation, whatever the field, like whatever the variable we are having, the values logically existed. It's nothing but for this particular variables, the memory allocation is going to allocated here. But here the memory is allocated, but we don't have a values. We did not initialize the values. Because of this, now whatever the I and j we are printing, we are getting as a 0.
Means values will not inherit, only the variables will inherit. Is it, sir? Or
See, this object creation is different, because the reference will contain 1 to 3 something. This reference will contain something like so 174 something. Okay, these two numbers are different. Okay, to understand more, so here I will print. So this is INA and this is INB. Okay, like try to see the references here. See, this reference is INA 2D360 FB3, and this is the different. These two objects and locations are different here. So we cannot pass this 10 and 20 into this subclass here.
so inheritance means we can access the variables from one class to another class.
Yes,
Am I right?
the superclass, whatever the superclass information we are
Variables,
defining, variables and methods, okay, that we can access into the subclass.
not the values, only the variables we can access.
See, while is totally is different. Value concept, because once we create an object only, we are going to initialize the value. Variables we can access, not the values here. Values entirely is different.
Okay, yeah, got
Okay, so for that purpose, the values we are getting 0. Now what we can do? So we need to initialize the values one more time, and finally, whatever the method we define, something like a sum method, inb dot sum method I'm calling, and this is the 75 we are getting. So I plus j plus k, the values we are getting as a 75. So any questions?
it. Sir, but we can modify the parent class value in the subclass, right? Like superclass value in the subclass.
Yeah, that we are doing, right? Super class we are coming with a 10 value. In the sum class we are doing something like 59 to 25. So values how we are going to load. Basically, see, from inheritance class you can call the super class method. By providing the values we can call. But how we are going to load the values? Because here if you see the object is entirely different. INB dot we are calling. INB dot show nj, INB dot showcase we are calling. When you are calling with a different object here, you cannot load the superclass value, sir, because this object is different. INA dot we initialize the value, but we are calling with the INB dot.
Okay.
So this is the different one. So when we are calling with a different object, we cannot load the values. With the same object reference only we can load, because the same object reference will contain the information. But here we don't have the object. Two objects are different here. Okay. So now we'll try to come up with one more example here. So we'll see how we can write the private related information. Okay. So here only I will try to define instead of coming with one more example. This particular J purpose, now what I will do, private integer. Okay. And now instead of returning this show and J, I am going to come up with the one method here. Set ij, and here int x comma into y, and I is equals to x, j is equals to y. Okay, so this is the way I'm setting the value. And finally, now if you go to this particular inheritance B, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to define here. Okay, now observe carefully. I'm defining the one variable called total, and inside this particular sum, now what I will do, total is equals to I plus j. Okay, so this is the total is equals to I plus j. But if we observe carefully, we are getting an error. Getting the one. So why we are getting an error here? Any
Because the
idea?
variable is private, J variable is private, we have defined in the superclass.
Yes. So now what you understand here?
So we cannot access private variables from one class to another class. The scope is only defined within the class.
Yes. So the private access modifier, it's not going to use in the inheritance concept. It's not going to participate in our inheritance concepts here because of the accessibility within the same class here. Okay. So not only the variable, if you define the methods also, getting the point. So for example, whatever the set is a method I used here, if I'm trying to come up with this method as a private, so this particular method also, it is applicable within the same class. Okay. So this is also important here. This particular method, again, we cannot call from this particular inheritance B. So this is I want to provide the information. Okay. So these are all the two simple examples we discuss here. Now what I will do, we'll try to come up with a more practical example, what we discussed in the last example called the box. So using this particular same box class, we'll try to implement the inheritance concepts here. Okay. So this section we'll discuss in the tomorrow session. So any questions regarding our today's session?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay. So if we don't have anything, we'll continue tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.